Have you ever noticed that people can be difficult sometimes? I mean, not any of us, but other people. You know, other people can be difficult at times. If everyone would just understand life the way we understand it, if everyone would just see the world the way we do, wouldn't it be a lot easier to navigate through life if they would just understand the way we want it and would just cooperate? Wouldn't it be nice if everybody would just understand that? The problem is that we all see things differently and we all desire different things. This also helps make life interesting and fun sometimes because we learn and grow from each other and we see things from a different perspective. But sometimes it can be frustrating. God knows we struggle to see eye to eye with other people from time to time. So he dropped this little nugget in our laps. He understands us. He understands that everything's not going to go my way sometimes, and you might irritate me or I might irritate you. So he goes ahead and he drops this thought out here. Look at Romans chapter 12 and verse 18. It says, if it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. In other words, is there anything else you could be doing to contribute to reconciliation or harmony in the situation? Is there something you could be doing to bring reconciliation or harmony to that circumstance? Sometimes there's not anything you can do, but sometimes there is something you can do. Today I want to expose a problem which seems to be growing in our culture, but apparently it's been around for a long, long time. Even when Jesus was walking the earth, his generation stumbled in this same area because we're people. We are really good at stumbling. Let's just be honest. People, we're vulnerable. We mess up. Sometimes even on a good day, we do things wrong unintentionally. We stumble in many ways. So even back in this generation, it was happening. Take a look at this moment the disciples got to share with Jesus. John chapter 9 and verse 1. Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? As they're walking down the road, they see a blind man who's never experienced sight. We say, hey, look at that. He can't do that. He's never been able to do that. They must have had a conversation with this guy, otherwise they wouldn't have known that he was born blind. They must have had a conversation. But after they found out that he was never able to see, the disciples asked Jesus if it was his parents' fault or his own. Whose fault is it? Was it his parents' fault or his fault that he was born blind? And I've always found their question to be a little odd. I think maybe they should have said, is it his parents' sin that caused him to be born blind? And stop right there. But they said, is it his sin or his parents' sin that caused him to be born blind? How could it have been his own sin that caused him to be born blind, since he would have had to commit that sin before he was born? Like, good way to think it through, guys. That was a good question. You know, why did you ask that? The question shows us that there's not a whole lot of thought involved in the assumption. The assumption's sitting there. Okay, somebody did something wrong because this guy was born blind. Look at how Jesus responds to this in verse 3. Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. Jesus then goes ahead and he heals this blind man. For the first time in this guy's life, he's able to see, which I don't know how you would describe that to somebody else. For us, we just take it for granted. We've always been able to see. But this guy, he now has vision for the first time in his life. And like, what's that like? How would you explain that? How would you explain that? So he finally gets to see, and at this moment, the disciples soak up a little bit more experience for their training. They were learning through everything they experienced in Jesus' ministry. These 12 guys got to follow the Son of God around everywhere. And they got to learn and they got to grow. Every answer Jesus gave, every miracle that Jesus performed, every time Jesus put the religious leaders in their place, the disciples grew in their understanding of God and of godly living. They got to grow in that area. They got a front row seat to the character of God right in front of them at all times. They got to see this. But the disciples weren't the only people who struggled with this problem that I'm wanting to address today. There were a lot of people that were struggling with this. There was a day when Jesus was confronted by a group of people who informed him about a violent act performed by the Roman governor Pilate. They come up to Jesus and say, I want to tell you about what the Roman governor did. I want to talk to you about this event that took place. Apparently, Pilate had attacked some people as they were performing sacrifices. And for reasons we do not know, he murders those people. A lot of people aren't familiar with this part of Pilate's life. We know the part where he stands with Jesus and he sentences him to death. We know that part of Pilate's life. But this happened too. He sees these people sacrificing to God, and he murders these people. This was an event that this crowd brings to Jesus' attention. But Jesus recognizes a different problem. Look at Luke chapter 13 and verse 1. It says, there were present at that season some who told him about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. And Jesus answered and said to them, do you suppose that these Galileans were worse sinners than all other Galileans because they suffered such things? Is that what you're thinking? Is that what's going on? Jesus knows their thoughts. He knows what's going on in their minds. Apparently, there was conversation being circulated about the character of the people who were murdered that day. Oh, these people died. All right. And Jesus says, oh, so do you suppose that these Galileans were worse sinners than other Galileans? Is that what we're going with here? Is that what's going on here? Why else would God have allowed something horrible to happen to them if they weren't worse sinners, right? I mean, God went ahead and smote them, like crush them. Because that's what God does, right? No, that's not what God does. That is not what God does. Jesus took the punishment for our sin. There's nothing else to be poured out. He took it all. But they're assuming, okay, so because these people have suffered these things, then God must have been upset with them. Jesus was able to pick up on this line of thinking, and he knew that this group was judging the victims. Think about that for just a minute. We're going to judge the victims. Not one thing here mentioned about Pilate. Okay? Pilate comes in and he murders these people who are making sacrifices to God. He mixes their blood with the blood of the sacrifices. And what are we going to go with here? Those sinners. Let's go ahead and judge the victims. Families have lost their loved ones due to a Roman tyrant that needlessly murders them. Portions of the community are left grieving, and this group of people was left judging the dead. How do you go that direction? But this is where they're at. But Jesus knew that this wasn't a one-time thing. He knew that they connected this mindset to other events also. This is just the way these people are thinking. So Jesus brings up another incident that had recently taken place. In the city of Siloam, a structural accident had taken place and 18 souls were lost that day. There was a structural problem, a tower. Something went wrong with the tower. I don't know the whole story there, but we do know a little bit about it. These people knew about that event, so Jesus asked them if they felt the same way about those 18 people. Look at verse 4 of Luke chapter 13. Or those 18 on whom the tower in Siloam fell and killed them, do you think that they were worse sinners than all the other men who dwelt in Jerusalem? I think probably that's why. Tower fell on them, they died. They must have been pretty bad sinners, right? Are you going that way too? They were questioning the integrity of those who were murdered by Pilate, so Jesus asked them how they felt about the integrity of the people who died in an accident. I mean, bad things happen to them too. The final result was the same for all these people, but some of them were being judged. They must have been dirty, rotten sinners. Jesus was exposing the mindset of these people. Yeah, they're talking about these events, but he's like, yeah, but there's a mindset problem here. You've got a mindset problem. These Jewish people were assuming the worst about these victims. The thoughts they had towards them were negative thoughts. Okay, shouldn't we be focused on the grieving that the families are going through or the loss of the community, something like that? But instead we're focusing on the victims and they must have been terrible sinners because this bad thing has happened to them. They had personally justified these people's death by assuming that they somehow deserved those deaths. The disciples were doing the same kind of thing by assuming that the blind man deserved blindness, or that his parents deserved that their child was born blind. Was it the parents' sin? Is that the problem? Is that why their son was born blind? Or maybe it was the blind person's sin, which, think about that for a second. That doesn't make sense. But it had to be a sin, right? Because a bad thing happened to a person, it must have been a sin. The initial thought was, what did you do to bring this upon yourself? That was the assumption. You must have done something bad because something bad is happening to you. But assumptions aren't always based on perceived acts of God. Sometimes an act of God happens and we're like, oh, wow. You know Job's friends in the book of Job? You know, it's so comforting. Read the book of Job sometime. It's ridiculous what his friends did. Job has boils on his skin. He's lost all his children. His wife says, curse God and die, man. Just end it. Go ahead and curse God and let him get you. You know, let's end this. There's so much suffering. The houses are destroyed. The cattle's gone. Everything. We've lost everything, Job. And then his friends come up and go, what'd you do? Like, that's really helpful. Yeah. What did you do to make God so mad? Like, I didn't do anything. Yeah. His friends weren't very helpful. So now, on top of everything else, you've lost your children, your livestock, your homes, your land. Your wife is saying, curse God and die. And then your friends come up and say, yeah, it's probably you. It's probably you. So to add insult to injury. So we see that happen in Job's life. This is what these people are doing. Something bad happened to you, so therefore, you must have done something bad. It's just a safe assumption, right? The initial thought when we see something terrible happen in somebody's life, if we think of it religiously, is God's trying to get your attention. No, sometimes bad things happen to good people. And sometimes bad things happen to horrible people. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. Life happens. We can't connect that to the character of God because God is good. But assumptions are all often placed on an act of God. But it's not only on an act of God. Sometimes they're based on perceived evidence. Let's jump back to the book of Genesis for a minute. I told you that this issue's been around for a minute. It's been around for a while. So let's go to the very first book of the Bible and see that this issue's been around for a little bit. Joseph had been sold into slavery by his brothers, and he's now living in a man named Potiphar's home. And he's got a good relationship with Potiphar. They're getting along fine. Potiphar's come to respect Joseph, and he fully trusts Joseph. He puts him in second in command. Hey, everything I have is yours, Joseph. I respect you. I trust you completely. And as Potiphar's out one day, this takes place. Look at Genesis chapter 39 and verse 7. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. Now this is Potiphar's wife. Mrs. Potiphar decides to make moves on Joseph. Okay, so nobody's here. Nobody's here. Potiphar's gone. It's just me and you. So she goes ahead and makes an advance. She sees an opportunity and she feels that she's in a position to demand this. She doesn't ask him to commit adultery. She orders him to commit adultery. But Potiphar's trust was well placed. Joseph's a good guy. He's a man of integrity. And so he answers her this way. Look at verse 8. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Joseph quickly reminds her that her husband has complete faith in him. He trusts me. Joseph's been put in charge. Potiphar doesn't even necessarily know what Joseph does. Just do the responsibilities, Joseph, the things I've asked you to do. What else should I do? I don't know. Just do whatever you're going to do. He just trusts that whatever he's going to do is going to be right. He has complete trust in Joseph. Joseph tells Potiphar's wife that he will not commit this sin, nor will he break his master's trust. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But this doesn't cause her to back down. She's a little bit what we call persistent. So she's not going to back down here. The Bible says that she continues to pursue him day after day. Then the perfect day arrived that if Joseph would have yielded to her temptation, nobody would have known. Nobody's around. The opportunity presents itself perfectly. Look at verse 11. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. Potiphar's wife decides to take what she wants, and Joseph remains a man of integrity. Now it's not just conversation happening. She grabs him, and he still remains a man of integrity. When she grabs a hold of his garment, he twists out of his garment and runs outside. He was determined to be a good man, and he was determined not to break his master's trust. It's not going to happen. And Potiphar's wife gets the message loud and clear. She's not going to have her way. He's not going to yield. So she decides to make Joseph pay. Look at verse 13. It says, "And so it was, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, 'See, he has brought in to us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened, when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside.'" Potiphar's wife just told these men that Joseph tried to rape her. Look what Potiphar did. He brought this Hebrew in, and look, he's mocking us. He just tried to have his way with me, and then when I screamed, he ran out. That's the story she's telling them. But Joseph has the other side of the story. Joseph knows the other side of the story. He knows the truth. He was an honest man, and he was known for it. All anyone had to do was ask him what really happened. They trust him. But when the news got to Potiphar himself, Joseph's life took a horrible turn. Now I want to recap on what we already know about this story. Joseph's a man in charge. Potiphar doesn't even know what Joseph has or necessarily what he does with his time outside of his normal, the responsibilities that he has. Potiphar has found a friend in Joseph, and he trusts him completely. These are things we know about the story. But once he's accused of trying to rape his wife, everything changes. Look at verse 19. "So it was, when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, 'Your servant did to me after this manner,' that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison." Joseph was doing everything he could to honor God and to honor Potiphar. We know that about the story. We know that about Joseph. He's doing everything he can to honor God and to honor his friend. And he remained faithful to both of these people, to God and to Potiphar. And then with one simple lie, the friendship between Potiphar and Joseph is over. It's over. Joseph's reputation was destroyed among Potiphar's family, and everything changed based on an assumption. It's just an assumption. That's all that's going on here. Now Joseph's going to spend years in prison, in a prison that he doesn't deserve. He didn't do anything wrong, but he still has to move forward with the consequences of a crime he did not commit. And it's all because of an assumption. That's all we've got going on here. There's no evidence for this. There's false evidence. Could it also have been that he left that behind because she grabbed it? I guess that's possible. It doesn't have to be that he left it behind because he ran away from her screaming because of the crime that he was committing. Either way would be plausible. But there's an assumption made here. And it all could have been avoided by having one conversation. It would have been enough. Throughout the centuries, relationships have ended and lives have been destroyed because of the power of assumptions. It's happened in my life. I've lost friendships, relationships have been broken because of things that were assumed that didn't actually happen. We've all made assumptions before, only to find out that later we didn't have the whole picture. We've all done it. Hopefully not in a level that it ruined a relationship, but we've all done it. We've all assumed things that weren't true. Every one of us have. This is a strategy that works so well that there's no way the enemy is ever going to stop using this. It's flawless. We can destroy people just with an assumption. Assuming is something people regularly do, but it's also something none of us want done to us. You better ask for the rest of the story if we're talking about me. But I assume you probably won't. Do you see what we just did? Oh, they're not going to ask me. They never do. They're just going to believe this about me. Are you assuming that? Yes, because I know that's a person that just assumes things. We're doing the same thing they're doing. It's like people that don't come to church because they believe that the church people are going to judge them. Well, that's an incredible judgment that you're making there. They're going to judge me, so I'm not going to church. Are you judging them? Is that what you're doing? Hopefully they won't judge you. Churches aren't for that. That's not what we should be doing, but it does happen. People in churches do judge other people. That's not just a story out there. That really does happen in so many churches. So it's probably a good judgment call, but aren't you judging them because you haven't experienced it yet? We all do this kind of stuff to each other all the time. Let me give you the definition of what an assumption is. It's a thing that is accepted as true or is certain to happen without proof. Or it's an idea that is formed without evidence. That is what an assumption is. Sometimes people just listen long enough to form an opinion about someone else without ever having the conversation with that person themselves. We just assume that we have all the information we need. God gives us a remedy to help us avoid making assumptions and dividing relationships. He does give this to us. Look at Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1. It says, "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted." This verse is speaking of someone who's actually overtaken with some kind of a sin. You see somebody who's been overtaken by a sin, this is what you're supposed to do. But when it comes to assumptions, it's not always the case that they've been overtaken by a sin. It's just assumed that they have been. And maybe the sin is just that they disagree with you. Maybe that's the sin. Okay? Oh, they're doing something unjust. That's what an assumption is. I assume that you're in the wrong because of something. It might just be a misunderstanding, who knows? But we assume that they are in a trespass, even if it's just against us. Okay? So here's the remedy. If you believe they're in the wrong, if you believe that their actions are causing division, then this is the way to handle it. Restore them in a spirit of gentleness. Okay? This is what we're supposed to do. This means that you speak to them without accusation. I'm not here to accuse you. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. You speak to them with a heart of restoration. The goal is to restore them, not to accuse them, not to attack them in any way. The goal is restoration. You're trying to restore them. That's the spirit we're supposed to do this with. Right after it says to restore them with a spirit of gentleness, it says to be careful that you're not tempted as well. Coming in with preconceived notions and opinions only leads to more division. Okay, I know this about you, so I'm coming to restore the relationship. Do you know that about them? Or do you just assume that about them? Come in with a spirit of gentleness and seek restoration. Once we already assume that we know all there is to know, we typically become very impulsive in the way that we deal with things. Like, because I already know. Maybe it's just an assumption. You're just assuming that. No, I know all there is to know. We come in to attack a problem that may not even exist because we're assuming the problem exists. Look at Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 29. It says, "He who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly." It feels good, doesn't it? Like that nice verse. Yeah. Not all the verses in the Bible do we like to see, but they're all necessary. They're all important. How does someone who is slow to wrath gain understanding? They do it by taking the time to listen rather than make assumptions. I'm going to take the time to invest in you. I'm going to take the time to listen. If we as society could get this under control, we would begin to see reconciliation and restoration happen all around us. If a society could do this, stop assuming, and let's come in with the spirit of gentleness and seek reconciliation. You could even be existing in a broken relationship right now that was torn apart through the power of assumption. You might be going through a relationship that's been shattered, and it was all because of an assumption. It is very possible. Sometimes there's part of the story that we don't know. Sometimes people do wrong things, but we don't understand why they did those wrong things. Maybe they did something bad to you because they were assuming something bad about you. So now we've got assumption going both ways. But the relationship's broken. We don't always know the backstory. We don't always know that. That's why it's so important to make sure we are not running our lives on assumptions. Don't run your life that way. Look at James chapter 1 and verse 19. So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. We can't control what anyone else might do. You can't control that. But we can guard our own hearts from going down this dark road of what is assumed. We can do that. I can't make you do that. I just assume you might. I can't see, that's as far as I can go. I can assume you will or I can assume you won't. But I can't make you do that. But I can do something in my own life about this. We need to train ourselves to be ready to listen, to take our time and think about what we're going to say before we respond. Just take a minute. What if they yell at you? Take a minute. Why did they yell at you? Because they hate me. What if they yell at you because they're hurting? I didn't consider that. See, that was an assumption. And a lot of times we get deeper into division because we're running on assumptions. It says to be slow to wrath. These are traits that belong to a wise person. You're quick to hear. I'm ready to listen. Slow to speak. I'm not just going to react. I'm going to respond. And that takes thought. And I'm going to be slow to wrath. Years ago, there was a radio program called The Rest of the Story, hosted by Paul Harvey. He died in, I think, 2009. But a lot of people know about the Paul Harvey's program, The Rest of the Story. Monday through Friday, people would listen to Paul Harvey as he would bring to light pieces of stories that most people were not aware of. Okay? We're like, yeah, we know that happened. Oh, but did you know the rest of the story? I did not. And as soon as he says, but then there's the rest of the story, we're like, okay, tell me more. We were interested. We were drawn in. I say we, not me, but I'm super young. So those of you that remember Paul Harvey, maybe it was reruns. I heard it. It was probably reruns. But anyway, as he would talk, we would listen because he was about to inform us of something that we had no idea existed. Sometimes people were shocked to learn things about others, and the average person had no idea that those things even happened because we were never told the rest of the story. When he finished telling the rest of the story, you may have had more compassion or more understanding for a situation or for a person's actions than you did before. It was a real eye-opener in some cases. Like, oh, wow. Why did that person treat all those people bad? Hey, let me tell you about their childhood. Oh, I didn't know about that. Well, let me tell you about their upbringing and the pain and the suffering that they saw in their life. And after we heard that, we go, no wonder. But all we were doing before was judging the person for how bad they were. And we didn't know the rest of the story. We didn't know the behind-the-scenes stuff. I know that our culture thrives on assumptions these days. It's like our life source. We just thrive on assuming things about each other. But we need to learn to take the time to hear the rest of the story. Take the time. Sometimes people behave badly because they're going through some kind of hurt in their own lives. Remember, hurting people hurt people. That's what happens. Somebody's treating you bad, it's probably a good idea to have that conversation. Hey, what's really going on here? You've got to be hurting. I know you're hurting because you're lashing out on me, but what's going on? What's behind the scenes here? What's happening in your life? To take the time with gentleness and say, can we talk about what's really going on? You might be able to restore a relationship before it's divided. You might be able to save that thing instead of get offended because you assume that they're doing what they're doing because of what you're assuming. Just restore the relationship. Come in with gentleness. Your relationships are important and people are not disposable. People are not disposable. We don't just accept the fact that the relationship has to be over. Have you taken the time to approach it with gentleness? Sometimes it won't be restored. It's true. Sometimes it's not going to happen. But have you tried to move forward with the conversation? Let's look at that text verse one more time here. Romans 12:18. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. It says if it's possible, live peaceably with all men. It's not always possible. Okay? If you say, well, for some reason I can't fix this, sometimes you can't. It's true, sometimes you can't. But sometimes people just won't have it. And that's true. They just won't have it. But then there's the other part of that verse there. As much as depends on you. Don't miss that. Like if it's possible, live peacefully with all men. Okay, I like that. Let's look at the other part, right there in the middle. As much as depends on you. This is the part where you can make a difference. That's the part where you can get involved. Maybe you have made assumptions about someone that you shouldn't have. It's possible. And you might be sitting there, yeah, but I know it's true. Have you had the conversation yet? No, then all it is at this point is an assumption. Maybe you didn't take the time to hear their side of the story and let them share their feelings with you. Are they hurting? Did they treat you bad because they assumed something previously about you? I thought it was you that did that to me. That's why I'm treating you bad. Oh, that wasn't me. Let's restore the relationship. Just that easy. An assumption is toxic. It's so toxic. Maybe restoration is just one conversation away. You don't know until you try. But it will never be made if someone doesn't first confront the situation with the spirit of gentleness. Somebody's got to make that step. So many people have been thrown into prisons that they should have never been in over the lack of communication. I will hold you there. I will have this grudge against you for the rest of my life. And then after I die, I will haunt you. You've had those moments. Like even death won't stop me from despising you. And a lot of times it's based on an assumption. Assumptions can be the reason friendships are broken or why families are divided. Now I'm going to drop this one thing and then I'm going to run out of the building. So you don't come at me here, okay? Nobody has time for anything. You don't have time for anything. I don't have time for anything. You have to make it. Because I'm telling you, by the end of this day, you will spend all the minutes that are in this day. You're going to do that. At the end of this week, 168 hours are going to be used up by you. You might not remember what you did, but you used it all up. You didn't save any of it for next week. You used it all up. Nobody has the time. You have to make the time. Slow down and invest in other people. Slow down and invest in somebody else, because you will fill up all your time for you. I will fill up all my time for me. I mean, you start throwing ice cream trucks out there, what am I thinking of? Me. Me. And then when the kids say, can we have ice cream? You know the story? If the music's playing, they're out of ice cream. So why do you say that? Because my money. I don't want to lose my money. And then when I have enough money and the kids aren't home, I want ice cream. What do? We're often inwardly focused. So what are you going to spend all your time on? You. There was one wise man once told me, we worry all the time about what people think about us. I hope they're not thinking this way, or I hope they're not thinking of me this way. And you know what he said to me? Nobody's thinking about you. Right? That's a little depressing. No, what are they thinking about? Themselves. We all are prone to do that. Nobody's thinking about you, they're thinking about them. What does God tell us to do? Slow down and invest in others. Maybe a relationship is broken. Have we taken the time to slow down and approach it with a spirit of gentleness and maybe restore that? Maybe put that behind us? Assumptions it's a master plan. And Satan would love for you to ruin every relationship you have based on assumption. Slow down. Be quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to wrath. It's amazing how many people you might have re-enter your life because you approached it with a spirit of gentleness. Don't base your understanding on assumptions.